because it freezes up after a period of time. So getting ready to turn it off, so you better come get it now if you want it. Are you done, Rufus? You got all? Oh, okay. All right. Just paper towel would be fine.
We'll clean it up. You want to turn it off? We'll clean it up.
Okay. Nobody else want any real quick? Just double checking before I turn it off. We do have some Bluebell in the freezer, Willie. It is, I think I saw some pistachio. It's a leftover from the adult luncheon, if you remember whatever we had at that luncheon. Pistachio, that's what it was. And I think mint chocolate chip or something. We have mint chocolate chip. We have the green. Yeah, it's in the freezer. Just walk in the freezer to the left, take it. Sherry Kugler's not here to tell you not to take it, right? It belongs to her, so you actually can take it. All right. So last couple of weeks, we've been looking at this idea of words to the cross. We know Good Friday, we normally hit the 7 words from the cross that Jesus utters, his 7 last words before he dies. And Ellsworth Callis, who was seminary professor for a while, wonderful pastor. He's done parables from the backside, just a real unique thinker and writer in the Wesleyan tradition. And he wrote this book, basically looking at using the word from the backside, looking at going to the cross from the backside is using his other books. But we're looking at different words, right, that take us to the cross. And the word today is indifference. That is the word today, indifference. All right. Now, before we get to why we have that word for indifference, I want you to think about indifference in not so much your life, your personal life, but in culture, in community, in our nation. We can't talk a lot about indifference in other people's nations, although we could make fun of France as much as we could, but we're not going to do that, all right? But we can think about indifference in our own country, right? And most of us have a limited view. However old you are, that's your view. So if you're 15 years old, right? You only have 15 years of looking back of your life to figure out, okay, what have I seen in my life? If you're 85 or 92 or something like that, you got a lot more years that you can look back and say, here's what I've seen in our culture, my community, my state, however you want to do that. But what have you seen where we as a culture, community, church, where indifference has seeped into our world? Where have you seen maybe a movement to some area in our world where there's now indifference, maybe where there wasn't before, right? Maybe that's the best way to look at it. Has something happened? Is there something that we can put our finger on and says, yeah, at this time in 1960, we were not indifferent, but now we are indifferent to something, whatever it is. Does anybody have any ideas? And I'm going to come to you because Pat Hellman went to a camera class and knows how to operate a camera that can feed. So anyway, anybody have any ideas at all where we have come to a place of indifference in our world, in our culture? Maybe not you, but what you see in the world. Anybody? None? Thank you, Pat. I'm coming to you because the world wants to hear.
Like global warming?
That could be. The climate stuff.
Some people don't believe it at all.
Yes.
And then there's some that do.
Yes, right. There's an indifference in our world about global warming and stuff like that. We have seen that more recently, truthfully, right? So we have. Yeah. Okay. So, anybody else? Any other things that pop in? I'm gonna give you a few minutes to think about it a little bit. You got one, Steve? You have an idea? Just one idea? Right. Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do.
I think that there was a certain indifference in our world, in the church world, towards what was happening in the secular world at the time that Roe v. Wade was passed the first time. Christians were dead to that issue and not active politically, and it passed without a question or comment by the Christian community. Then when it passed, they said, what did we do? What did we let happen? And now you're seeing the opposite. Christians are reacting to everything almost immediately in the political world.
Yep.
You know, with abortion, with climate change, with government interference and all those.
Yep.
So you see the Christians being more active as opposed to what we were before 9/11. We felt like, well, that's the world and that's not a part of us. We're going to be leaving this world, so it don't matter.
Okay.
But we're changing our attitude.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? Michelle's either praising the Lord or she has a comment. One of the two. I'm not sure. I'm sure. I'm going to go around. No, I was going to reach across your Irene, but I'm not. All
The
right.
structure of the family.
A what?
The
Structure of the family.
It used to be every Sunday everybody gathered at Grandma's house, and now you have to set an appointment up to see your grands.
Okay. This is being recorded, so I'm not going to make a comment. All right. Anybody else? Bob's got to make sure that Pat doesn't have the last word. I think that's the deal here. So.
From our meeting with the men's on Sunday a week ago, we were given statistics about young men in the church, and it shows there's an indifference for young men leading their families in worship. Less now, and it's growing bigger as the time goes on.
Yes. Yep. Yep. All right. Anybody else? Anyone else? Going once? Going, all right, Glenn, you got one? Wait a second. You got to wait till I get over there, man. You got to wait till I get over there. So.
You can holler.
I don't know. To me, it just seems like there's so much hate in the world and everything that's going on. It's really difficult to find anything to be different about.
Okay.
I mean,
All right. All right. That's not a bad observation, right? So polarization has sort of taken over on some areas of the indifferentiation, right? Indifference, right? All right. So this is, I think it's anecdotal, but it, when I say this one, you might go, oh, yeah. Is it me, or is there an indifference to vulgar language? Does anybody say, no, we've always had that? Does anybody, right? Now, I'm looking at my young people over here. Y'all know nothing different, right, in y'all's lifetime, right? Am I serious, right? Okay. Well.
I grew up in the Baptist. There wasn't much indifference to it.
Okay, all right. Well, Savannah went to Northview with my daughter, so I know what they heard there. But it's in all of our television shows now, right? It's you can't turn on anything now, right? You can get away with every word. We're talking about the George Carlin 7 words thing, if you remember the George Carlin bit where he talked about the 7 words you can't use. We don't have that skit anymore, right? We can use everything, and we have become indifferent to that language. And we, even though some of you know I officiate high school football, I do some baseball, but sort of had to take a break this year. Mostly been doing football since 2006. Well, for years, we had a guy named Steve Savarese was our head of the Alabama High School Athletic Association. He had a zero tolerance policy toward language from players, coaches, zero tolerance, right? Did that filter down to us on the field? Somewhat, but we still had we gave a lot of leeway, I will tell you. We gave a lot of leeway when it came down to local associations, right? There's obviously one word we flagged pretty regularly, 2 words we flagged really regularly, the F-bomb and the N-word. We flagged that regularly. Everything else, we have a warning. That was sort of the instructions that we were given. So even though he had zero tolerance policy, it filtered down. The way it was officiated was coaches are being coaches, kids are being kids type thing, right? So, and even in a household that language was not used, right? Guess who I hear using some of that language? My own kids. They didn't hear it in my household, but it was accepted everywhere else. And it's I can't fathom it. I mean, I had one kid that I hung around with in 1977, 78 that I heard say regularly the F word. But that was few and far between. It wasn't like it was everyday language. It is everyday language. And it's not thought about. And nobody, hardly anybody says anything about it. It's said in public, it's said most places, and it's just, that's the way it is. There's an indifference toward that. All right? Steve brought up the abortion thing. We in our country have really moved to show an indifference toward alcohol and even smoking to some extent. Those two vices that we talk of, that we have heard about and read about, prohibition and laws and all this other stuff, there's been a growing indifference to that, right? Even though there's warnings, even though there was lawsuits, even though there's studies proven all the dangers of this stuff, there's an indifference. There's an indifference to these things. In fact, I think it was Ellsworth Callis who sort of wrote this study. He extrapolated. He said, "I wonder what if somebody looks back on today, 100 years later or 150 years later." And knew the dangers of overconsumption of alcohol, yet we kept advertising it and pushing all that. Wonder what they're going to think about us, right, when we did that. You know, we did take away what the TV advertisement for smoking. We did that, right? Still marketed and still out there a good bit. So that was some indifference. Examples that in addition to what y'all said. All right, so I'm going to move a little bit to sort of where we're heading. Can you think of jobs that people have that would make them, because of the nature of their job, move them to a place of indifference just because of the nature of their job? Can anybody think of any of those? Any of those particular jobs? I have 2 that I'm going to talk about, but I wonder if anybody else has any ideas of what, if you're in a job day after day, week after week, year after year, it will cause you to be indifferent about something because of your job position. Anybody have anyone in mind? Bob has one, and it's not going to be owner of Circle City Glass.
You know, like the ladies at the tag office or the Social Security office, they've got to be somewhat indifferent. I can't see them not being.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Fortunately, the ladies at the Dale County tag office hadn't got there yet. Maybe the Houston County tag office hadn't been there in a while, but Dale County people are still good. So Houston County, I can't speak for, but anybody else? So that's an indifference toward just the public, right? Just indifference toward dealing with the public, right? Jane, do you have one?
I think nurses dealing with death.
Yes.
I'm very indifferent to it.
Yep. Nurses dealing with that. Anybody else? Dave? Cooks?
Yeah, I mean, when I served in the Marine Corps, we had an indifference to profanity.
Yes.
And the F word was a noun, verb, adverb, pronoun. I mean, it's,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
we couldn't speak with each other unless we used that, so.
It was a proper name too, wasn't it?
Yeah. Not that I use it now, but it's.
All right, right. You gonna correct him? You gonna? I may have heard it on the golf course. Okay. Well, it was. All right. Anybody else? Anybody else? The what? The police.
Indifference about the way people were just going harebrained with
Right,
things,
just
and then
very pessimistic attitude toward the
when
public again.
they get into jail and then they get them out just
Yep.
so they're not getting in any trouble.
Yep. Yep. All right, so I actually thought of two people, and I put a name to those people, and I called them, talked to them this morning. And so the first person I called, I thought I turned it off, Logan. I'm sorry, buddy. I'm sorry. All right. I thought I turned it off, but I'm going to leave it on anyway, but hopefully it'll roll off. All right. So the two people I thought about that could have an indifference to death and suffering was funeral director and a hospice doctor, right? And I know I know plenty of funeral directors. I only know of one hospice doctor, by the way. So I called the funeral director. The one that I know the best is Robert Byrd. And as I was talking to Robert Byrd and telling him sort of what I was talking about tonight, he reminded me that the dealing with as a coroner, as the Houston County coroner, would have more profound effect on him, right? Because I was asking him, I said, how do you deal with this? I mean, he's day after day, right? As a funeral director, day after day. Sunset's one of the busier ones we have in this area. So it's hardly a day goes by that he and his staff are not dealing with somebody that has just lost someone, all right? Even this week, a 2-year-old this week. And so I said, how you deal with not being? I think I even used the word callous to death. I used that with the hospice doctor too. How you keep yourself from not being calloused to death? And we ended up talking about his coroner responsibility. Because by the time he deals with the family in the funeral part of it, it's been about 24 hours normally, sometimes 36, 48 hours so they've got over the initial shock, right? But as coroner, he's there. I mean, he's there within sometimes minutes, but at least within an hour or two, and the family's still there. The family's still there. And we're talking about, they don't call the coroner when somebody in hospice dies. You know that, right? They don't call somebody with a natural death when there's somebody else present. They're calling the coroner when it's a shock, when it's tragic, murder, stuff like that, right? So that's when he gets called, not the unexpected deaths. And it's those, he said, that obviously would lend itself to him having a more calloused atmosphere or callous idea about death in particular. But he says what he tries to do, and he's been doing this since he was 24 or something like that. I think he's been doing it since he was 24, and I think he's like 102 now or something. I don't know. So he's pushing 70, right, Bob? Isn't he pushing 70? I think Robert's probably 65, 60. Yeah. So close to 50 years, Yeah, about 50, almost 50 years in the industry type thing. And he says, particularly with being a coroner, he just tries to help the family. He puts his focus on the family, of trying to help them bridge what just happened to whatever comes next. He also says that, because that's what I said. I said, now, in one of those, I mentioned one that he and I knew was related to our church a year and a half ago. And I said, so you show up for that. When you go home and you are talking to your wife, Tony, or you're hanging out with your grandkids or something like that, how do you not be so indifferent to what just happened and able to re-engage with your family? And he says it's actually the both and thing with being the funeral director and coroner, is that he actually has used those experiences, as either coroner, the tragedies, or just simply dealing with people with death, to make him appreciate his family more. He said that's how he deals with it. It helps him refocus on the importance of being with his family, wife, kids, grandkids, and stuff like that. That's how he deals with it, he said. But he also said this, particularly on the coroner side of his job, that what helps him. Now this is, again, I'm just trying to find, because I've known Robert since '99, so I've dealt with him many, many times, and he's always professional, always seems to be concerned about the family and everything. But he and I joke a lot, truthfully. Not around the family, but we joke a lot. And he said that in those instances, he sees that the one thing that helps him, he says, in the death of this person, no matter how tragic it is, he said, it helps me to believe that they're not suffering in this physical body anymore. So he actually processes that in his mind. And he recounted, and I asked him for permission to do this. He said, when he was 24, a wreck happened when he was working with a peanut company, and he was the first one on the scene. The person that was in the wreck was still alive, was gasping for breath. And so he still remembers that. I mean, you're talking about 46 years ago. He still remembers that. Because I told him I said, there was a wreck in front of my house in Florida. I heard like a shotgun blast, boom. I was the first one on the scene, and I knew as soon as I got there that the people in the head-on collision, everybody was dead. 2 in the truck, 1 in the car. The one in the truck was, I just knew he was dead. And so he said, that's how he helps get through this whole deal, is just understanding that this time they're not suffering. Their physical body is not suffering anymore. So my other phone call was to Melanie Nichols. Some of y'all might know Melanie Nichols, right? This is Gene and Sharon Nichols' daughter-in-law. She now is teaching hospice stuff at ACOM, but for 8 or 10 years she was the hospice physician. And I think my first encounter with her, knowing him doing that, was when Reverend John Bryan died. And Reverend John Bryan's widow, Glenda, is still a part of our church. And so I was asking her, I said, how did you deal with it? Because hospice, technically, by definition, we think it is a death sentence, but it's not always that way. Okay, I understand that. Hospice is to provide care. It doesn't mean that everybody that goes into hospice will die, right? We try to remind people of that. I still remember Ann Landers had an Uncle Hugh that he went into hospice, stayed there 2 years, and they took him off, right? He took him off, Now, obviously, Uncle Hugh died a few years later, but it's not always. But by and large, when you're a doctor in hospice, the vast, vast majority of your clients and your patients are going to die. And so, as a doctor, knowing that, right? It's one thing to be a doctor that you have your primary care doctor, I mean, he knows, I mean, mine's Mike Williams. He knows I'm going to die eventually, but it's not imminent like the hospice care doctor sees normally. So I asked Melanie about this, and she said what she does and what she's teaching her students now, because there's a rotation at ACOM. I didn't know this. There's a rotation for hospice care for the doctors out there. So they have a 1-month rotation, and with hospice. And what she says is she always tries her best to develop the relationship, not just with the patients, with the family. That's what she's teaching. She teaches that. Now, not every family wants more relationship with the physician, but that's what helped her, right? Go through this because if you think about it, yes, she's going to ultimately see death, but she continues that relationship with the living as well. That helps her keep grounded in that. And she realizes her role. She realized her role in this was to not just bring comfort to the patient, but to bring comfort to the entire family. Because it was a family decision normally when they were going through this deal with hospice, all right? So she knew. And that's the way it helped her. It also helped her that she was a part of a team. She was not on an island by herself. And I knew this about her, but she can't extrapolate this to every doctor in hospice. But she is one that realizes as a doctor, she's not just there for physical. She's also there for emotional, spiritual, and mental. And she encourages her students to do that. If they choose hospice or when they go through the program, but that was for her. All right, so that was a couple different ways that 2 real life people in our community are dealing with not being indifferent to death, and I think that that is so. That is, I just think that would be so tough, right? That'd be so tough to not be indifferent when you see it so much. So the word indifferent, we find this really. Nick talked to Pontius Pilate last week. This is right after the Pontius Pilate story in John chapter 19. Yeah, right after 19. When Pilate says, I have written what I've written, 19:22. When the soldiers, verse 23, when the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, divided them into 4 shares, one for each of them, with the undergarment remaining. This garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. Let's not tear it, they said to one another. Let's decide by lot who will get it. This happened that the scripture might be fulfilled. John adds that they divided my clothes and among them cast lots for my garment. And this is what the soldiers did. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. So that is our story, right? The soldiers at the cross. Now, based on some little research, there were 4 soldiers at each of the cross. That means there was 12 soldiers there. 4 for the each 4 for the criminals on the left or right. So we had 12 different soldiers, but the 4 assigned to Jesus is the passage that we're talking about. Now, crucifixion was normal. Was a normal way of death and trying to control people. And so during this time, it's been estimated that this was routine. We sometimes venerate this crucifixion of Jesus to such an extent that we forget about this was just part of what they did. They were crucifying criminals all the time, which meant the 4 guards that we're looking at, that was their job. That was the job they did probably every day at times. Now, they had to stay all day and to make sure that they were dead. A lot of times the Romans left people on the cross, right? Jesus got taken down, but a lot of times they leave him on the cross as deterrence for some time, right? So these guys could have been, think about how many days they could be doing this. So over and over, they were doing the same thing over and over again, right? So what we find out, if you think about how brutal the crucifixions are, how horrific they are, violent, every word you can imagine, that was there, right? Anything that you could think of, torture, whatever word you want to throw in there, that was happening. Soldiers, day after day, week after week, living in it, being a part of it, being a part of the violence, being a part of the brutality, of the torture, right? The filth, the agony, and death. That was all there. And what did they do? They gambled. They were at the foot of Jesus' cross, and they gambled. What did they gamble for? They gambled for one piece. That's what they did. There was 5 pieces. Normally, people had 5 pieces of clothing. Those who did the crucifixion would have first dibs, basically, on the clothing. So you had shoes/sandals, a turban, girdle, tunic, and outer robe. The 5 different things. 4 soldiers. Good chance they've already divided up the 4 things, so they have one thing left. The robe, the piece of cloth, the tunic that was seamless. That's what they were gambling for. And they said, let's not tear it. Let's not tear it. There's a legend out there that says that this garment was Mary's last gift to Jesus when he left and started his ministry. That's just out there, right? But the point of it being seamless meant it was worth something. And so the soldier says, let's not tear it. Let's not tear it. So they're gambling for this one piece of clothing, ignoring the man on the cross, ignoring the lady standing near the cross who was still crying. They ignored her. They could have given her his garment. Nope, not going to do that. They're going to gamble. Let's not tear it. So can we explain this away? Maybe can we just simply say these guys were just thoughtless, right? They weren't thinking, or they just indifferent. They were indifferent to everything. You know, they probably weren't thinking at all. They probably weren't thinking. But they were thinking. They just weren't thinking very deeply. You know, we've done that before. You know, we don't think deeply, right? There was in 2018 in Texas, there's a wealthy rancher that was dying, and his adult children began fighting over the family's money before he died. One sibling accused the other sibling of manipulating their father into changing his will while he was mentally declining. They had other allegations of undue influence. There was fraud. There was legal battles before Dad died. They were thinking. They just weren't thinking very deeply. Ended up draining most of the family resources during all this deal. Here's the deal. We think at a level that we train our minds. We think at a level we train our minds. So these soldiers that were at the foot of the cross, they were thinking at a level that they had trained at. And actually, when I was talking to Robert, he brought this up, and which is the same case. He talked about the Nazis in the concentration camps. They were thinking at the level that they were trained and how many millions that they killed without any remorse, without any questioning, except for a few. What Schindler, one of those, right? We think at the level we are trained. You know, we probably think that this is anecdotal, but there are actually some studies that talk about this, about video games and violence, that children who experience more violence are likely to become more violent as adults. And a lady named Kathy Whittam had a long study that abused or neglected children are significantly more likely to be arrested for violent offenses later in life. So the more you're exposed to video games, family and stuff, the more likely you will be that as you're older. However you're trained, however your thinking is trained, right? Another study by Anderson and Bushman said the same thing. Exposure to video games and TV violence increases aggressive thoughts and feelings and behaviors and decreases empathy. Decreases empathy. And then a famous study, not so famous, but a study from 2002 from Bob's favorite place, Columbia University, found that prolonged exposure to violent television in childhood increased the likelihood of aggressive or violent behavior in adulthood. So there's studies that said that how you're training your mind is how you're going to end up being, more likely, or more the chances are that way, all right? There's some things we do in our life that we are trained to do without thinking, okay? How many of you thought about drinking your tea or water or lemonade today, right? How many of you thought about eating your meal? You don't think about those things. You just do it. You've been trained, you know. Most of you don't think about walking. Those of us who've had surgery have to think about it a little more, right? But we don't think about walking a whole lot. We just go do it, right? I don't think about, truthfully, my drive to Covenant, because 90% of the time I'm doing the same thing. Get to the end of my driveway, I turn left on County Road 59. Get to 231, I'm turning left. Get to John Deodham Road, I'm turning right. I get to Watley, I'm turning left, turn right on Shady Lane, turn left on 84, get in the turning lane right before the church and turn in. I don't think about it. I just do it, right? How we trained, you know, that's sort of how we act, right? And so what we see with the soldiers is, yes, they were trained in a certain way, but at the same time, they were also preoccupied. They were preoccupied. Jesus told the story, the sower, right? And they throw the seeds here, there, and everywhere. And one of the things he said was the thorns. The seed went to the thorns, and the cares of the world is what he called the thorns. When the seed went in the thorn, it actually sprouts up, but the cares of the world, the thorns, choke it out. Choke it out. And this can happen in our lives. The details of our everyday lives, the cares of the world, can preoccupy us and choke us out to where we are indifferent to everything else around us. We're preoccupied with simply the practical, everyday living of our lives. So what can happen with us is we get too busy with our life that we don't see life. We get too busy with our life that we don't see life. How are you preoccupied? The soldiers, they saw value in that tunic. They were strangely blinded to human life because they were preoccupied with that tunic that they deemed very valuable. It's a little ironic, don't you think, that not too much before this crucifixion, there was a woman who was bleeding for 12 years. She believed if she just touched the edge of the garment, that she would be healed. But to the soldiers, that's just something to gamble on. How many times a day do we hold God, do we hold life and beauty in our hands and miss it simply because we weren't thinking? Or we were thinking about something else. We were preoccupied. Here's our challenge. Recognize when we are so preoccupied that we're indifferent to the needs around us. And those needs could be sitting right next to us. They could be our family, that could be our friends, and that could be our community. Will you recognize when you are preoccupied and when you're indifferent to those needs that are around you? Thank you, God, for our word of indifference. And God, I think we're all there at times. We are all there. We have gone down the road where we're so narrowly focused on what's in front of us that we're thinking, but we're not deeply thinking. And we're not seeing whatever else is around us. Open our eyes, open our hearts. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. One other addendum. That will preoccupy you more than anything else in the world today. Okay? So what I love to see people do is when they sit down at the table and are eating, that the phones are put up, right? And I see a lot of that tonight, truthfully. Except when I started talking, then you pulled your phone out, but that's okay. But I love seeing that tonight. People will sit down and talk, and they don't have their phones out. I saw it all over the place. So that's a simple practice that all of us can do to be able to keep the needs around us. It's also some of the things that I hear as challenges for couples still today. All right, go in peace. Thanks.